celebrant, and I feel extremely privileged to have been asked by the family to speak in Barry's honour today. Before I start today's service, can I please ask everyone to check that your mobile phones are off or switch to silent throughout the service, please. A very special welcome to those people live streaming the service today. It's lovely that you are able to join us, even though from far away. Also, can I ask, if you haven't taken the time to sign the attendance register as you entered the venue today, can you please ensure you do that before you leave, as this is a precious keepsake for the family of your attendance here today. The family knew... Here we go. I hope you heard all that other stuff, or should I start again? On behalf of Barry's family, I'd like to thank you all for your presence and support, and for the heartfelt messages and kindness people have shown them in these difficult times. And to all those people who have travelled long distances to support the family, thank you very much. The family knew that there would be a lot of people who would come to say their goodbyes to Barry and to pay their respects to the family. But to look up and see just how many people are here today is a testament to the man that Barry was and what an impression he has had on so many lives. He certainly did touch many lives over his journey, and I'm sure you all feel emptier for his death, none more than his family. Our heartfelt sympathy goes to his children and partners, Debbie and Murray, Kerry and Shane, and Rodney and Claire, his brother Neil and wife Christine, his grandchildren Jake, Blair, Jack, Sam, Harry, Matt, Hannah and Sarah, and great-grandson George. So as we all know, a fine gentleman has been lost to us. So we're here today to celebrate his life, a wonderful 80 years of Barry Donald Augustine. Barry was a man of unique character. No one word could possibly sum him up. He was a big man with a big personality and a huge heart. He valued the things that make up a person of impeccable character: sincerity, integrity, fairness, kindness, and hard work. Over his lifetime, he'd been a loving husband, a provider for his family, an inspirational father and friend, and a loving and generous and caring grandfather. He was loyal to the people in his life. He was also a very colourful character. He also had a story for you, and whenever you saw him, he delivered it with a smile and an impish wink. He was a good-natured, fun-loving larrikin with a warm heart and caring nature. Barry had a laid-back approach to life. He was extremely generous and always looked after those less fortunate than himself. He was a respected member of the community, having sat on numerous boards and committees. He was a successful businessman and true publican. He took each of his roles in his life seriously, giving them the importance that they all deserved. He lived for his family and liked nothing better than having them all around him. His unique strength of character, his caring nature, his understanding and acceptance of others are things that everyone will remember. So in the short time we have here this afternoon, we will celebrate Barry's life. We'll continue to tell his story and support his family who are left behind. As we move through the service today, you'll be hearing words from his family, and there may be moments when you're brought to tears, and there'll be moments when you will laugh at a story that you can personally relate to. All I ask is that you be open to your heart, allow your emotions to surface and be expressed in words, in tears, in reflection, or in whatever way is meaningful to each of you. At the conclusion of this part of the service, you are all welcome to join the family at the Ballarat Cemetery for the committal, and then they will be returning to the East Point football and netball club rooms to share in some refreshments and where you can all recollect those special times that you've spent with Barry. Can I invite those members of the family and friends that have special memorabilia that they would like to place up the front to come forward and do so? Thank you, everyone. It's my privilege now to share with you a tribute to Barry's life. Barry Donald Augustine was born in Ringwood on the 15th of April 1941 to his adoring parents Doris and George Augustine. However, due to it being wartime, Barry was 2 years old before he got to meet his dad. Barry was the family's firstborn and later welcomed a brother, Neil, to the family. Barry attended primary schools in Ringwood, Seaford, Bannockburn and Dana Street in Ballarat and finished his schooling at Central Tech. He was like any happy teenage boy, hanging out with his mates, riding bikes and getting into harmless mischief. Life was innocent and adventures were rife. Barry loved all forms of outdoor curricular activities, such as fishing, shooting, rabbiting, and most of all, ferrets. As a kid, he played tennis, table tennis, pool, quoits, enjoyed a punt on the horses or greyhounds, and later in life owned a couple of horses with the Smurdens. And he bred and raced greyhounds. Barry's greatest pastime was Aussie rules football and all the antics that went along with it, the camaraderie-ship, the thrill of the win, the beer and the banter with his mates. At age 16, he gained himself an apprenticeship as a plumber working for Kenny Peart. A few years later, he met Enid. It was after a footy match at Maryborough. Barry adored Enid from the minute he laid eyes on her, and they dated for a while, got engaged, and when he was 21, they were married on the hottest day of the year in Maryborough on the 1st of December 1962. Enid was definitely the love of his life. They built their first home in Lovenere Grove in Ballarat, and their first daughter Debbie was born in 1963. Barry completed his apprenticeship and then went on to work as a warden at Langy Kalkal Youth Training Centre for a couple of years. The family lived on the residence there, and Kerry was born in 1965 and Rodney in 1968. Barry would work 4 days at the prison and 4 days plumbing. He used to play football for Langy Kalkal, and he was held in very high regard by the Langy boys. In fact, when Langy Kalkal football disbanded, he used to take the boys to the Lexton Football Club to play footy. Barry and Enid never had any desire to travel overseas. They preferred to see Australia, travelling by car, train or boat before flying, because he was afraid to fly. He would rather his feet on the ground. Flying was the absolute last option. Every year the family holidayed at St Leonard's. St Leonard's was a very special place to Barry. The family moved from Langy Kalkal to Lexton in 1976 into the general store, which Barry and Enid worked for the next 3 years. In 1979 to 1982, they became the publicans of the Lexton Hotel, which they owned and operated for the next 3 years. They sold up and renovated a home in Lexton, which they lived in for approximately 1 year, while deciding on what would be their next business venture. In 1983, they moved into Ballarat and became the publicans of the City Oval Hotel, alias Jika Jika, or the CO, and this is where they were to spend the next 22 years. I'm sure every one of you here would have a story to tell about a time at the City Oval Hotel. Barry and Enid were great business partners. They were wonderful publicans, and I've heard it said that Enid worked the bar and Barry drank the beer. They welcomed everyone and were highly regarded in the industry. As I said earlier, Barry was always a great sportsman and was successful at many different sports. He played table tennis and was a member of the Lexton Tennis Club, where he played up until his 40s, and continued to play socially for a few years after moving to Ballarat. He played competition hotel pool and competition quoits. His real love, as I said, was the football. Barry's football career started at the Elaine Football Club in the juniors in 1955. He then went to North Ballarat for 3 years and then to the Lexton Football Club, where he spent the next 15 years. He played and coached the reserves for 6 years to 6 premierships. He was president for 11 years at Lexton, made life member and was vice president and acting president of Lexton Football League. He was also a representative on Victorian Country Football League board. In 1983, Barry started his association with East Ballarat Football Club, and the story goes, it was on a Sunday afternoon and he was looking for somewhere to have a few beers. He had gone to a couple of football clubs, of which none were open. He went down to the East Rooms and they were open, and hence began his alliance with East Ballarat. Barry was elected president of East Ballarat in 1985 till 1982, and led them 1992, and led them to back-to-back premierships in 89 and 90, and again in 93 as vice president. Barry was an icon of the club, never missed a game, proudly watching his son Rodney and play, and then his grandsons. Every weekend he would be there with his mates, enjoying a few beers and a few pies, surrounded by his old mates and the young up-and-coming legends of the club that all held him in the highest regard. Barry was also a one-eyed Collingwood supporter, having been a member for 49 years. His other favourite pastime was breeding and racing greyhounds. He was a life member of the Ballarat Greyhounds and over the years had many, many winners. Barry and Enid retired from the pub in 2005 and built their home at Dyson Drive, which was to be their forever home. They were planning on a trip around Australia, but unfortunately Enid fell ill, so their plans didn't eventuate. They had some good years at Dyson Drive and were proud of the beautiful home they had created. With time on his hands, Barry began breeding greyhounds again and soon ran out of room to house them all, so they sold up and moved to Warborough Junction Road in Sulky. Barry was very house-proud, liked everything neat and tidy, a place for everything and everything in its place. And this is where his delegation skills come into place. He loved to delegate. Put this there, get me this, get me that. He could be quite demanding at times. Enid passed away sadly in 2013, which left Barry totally devastated. Soon after, he sold the property at Sulky and moved to the cottage at Rodney and Claire's property. After Enid passed away, Barry became very routine. Monday nights, he'd always watch the Angle Park Dogs on TV, having a few stubbies at home. Tuesday night, he went to the Brown Hill pub and had 22 pots with Roscoe. Rodney told me he knew he always had 22 because he'd fill up 2 drink cards, 11 on each card. Wednesday night was Ballarat Greyhound track with his mates. Thursday night, he cooked tea for Rodney, Claire and the kids, and anyone else who may be visiting at the time. A feed of lamb shanks or oxtail, curried sausages or his famous roast and famous spuds. Friday night was bowls club with his mate Roscoe. Saturday in the winter was East Point footy, and summer he'd watch the bowls. Saturday nights often ended up at the Miners' Tavern and get a taxi home in the wee hours of the morning. Sunday nights usually recovery night, and he rarely drank on a Sunday. Barry was a strong-willed, very determined to do things his way. 2 years ago, Barry suffered a stroke and has spent the last years of his life in Calliston Aged Care Facility, still managing to get to his beloved East Point whenever he could. A close friend told my husband that he'd been to visit Augie at Calliston and said, "Well, I'm not going back there. He made me scratch his back for an hour." On the 18th of May, sadly, Barry closed his eyes for eternal rest and peacefully slipped away. I hope it gives you all some comfort to think of him at peace and back reunited with his beloved Enid. We're going to have some tributes now from family and friends, so if I can firstly invite Barry's children, Debbie, Kerry and Rodney, to come forward.
I am. Before I start the tribute, I just wanted to do a few thank yous. First off, I'd like to thank you, Maxine, for her compassion and patience as our celebrant. She's done a great job, and we've had a few phone calls not knowing what was going on, but yeah, thank you. Pat Cashin, the funeral directors, for their empathy and professionalism. Ballarat Greyhound Club for allowing us to use this fantastic venue. It's just beautiful. East Point Football Netball Club and North Ballarat Football Netball Club for their tributes and for honouring Dad with a minute's silence before the match last weekend. It was very emotional. East Point Football Netball Club for opening their rooms to us again this afternoon and their support over the many years. To all the people who have helped with catering, and especially Marianne, Narelle, Tracy and Co, thank you very much. His two doctors, Dr Bongiorno and Dr Paul Kirian, that wouldn't have been an easy task. Calliston Aged Care for their kindness and compassion over the past week and for the care of Dad over the past 2 years. He did have his favourites, but appreciated you all, and you were all wonderful to him. To Neil, thank you for spoiling Dad with ice creams, fish and chips, sweet and sour pork, pork meals more often than not behind our backs, and being such a devoted brother. To Dad's friends who came to visit him regularly, especially over the past 2.5 years while in care, he loved seeing you there. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all of Dad's immediate family for the love and care, particularly during his time at Calliston. While we all did as much as we could from the family, I would just like to say a big thank you for being at Dad's side when the rest of us couldn't, and that's to Kerry. Sorry, I've missed that out. To Kerry, when the rest of us couldn't. I know Dad and us will be ever grateful for your love and care. Love you, Kez. To all of you who are here today and those who are watching via the link, we say thank you for being with us as we say farewell to Dad. Thank you for your love and support, for the messages and phone calls, for sharing your memories, the beautiful flowers and cards, and especially your friendship. Now, we'll start the other. Let's see how we go here. Okay. If we could write a story, it would be the greatest told. But how do we fit such a full and well-lived life into just 20 minutes? We can't. It's impossible. Our hardest task has been deciding what to include today, but we'll do our best. Thank you. The stories we have heard over the years, and especially this past week, there have just been too many. Barry Augustine, affectionately known as Augie, Aug, Baz or Bazza, and considered to be a great bloke, an icon, a big personality, a larger-than-life character, a mentor and teacher, a generous and caring person, hospitable, a larrikin, a real good delegator, a champion, a legend, and to us he was a proud pa, a wonderful father, and a devoted and loving husband. His loves in life were simple: Enid, family, mates, a feed, a punt, a few pots, greyhounds, a back scratch, St Leonard's, fishing, a few pots, a win by Lexington, East Point, and of course Collingwood, and a few more pots. So we decided to focus more about his qualities and the love of his lives. His greatest love was Mum, Enid, his best mate, who he called Eenie or Skin. They met at a dance in Maryborough after North Ballarat had played Maryborough in a football match. A few of the North boys stayed to play up a bit and ended up at the local dance. Dad fell over on the dance floor, probably having a few too many, and Mum picked him up. When he looked at her, he thought she was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, and he said to her right there and then, "I'm going to marry you one day." The rest is history. They married on December the 1st, 1962. It was the hottest, it was above 40 degrees, and Dad always said it was the hottest day that he can remember, and how everyone was sticking to the pews.
Hi everyone. In the early years, life was simple. They were part of a generation where men went to work and the women took care of the home and the children. They both worked hard, and once us kids were all at school, Mum would go spud or grape picking with some of her friends and earn a few extra dollars, and Dad worked his 4 days on and 4 days off at Langy-Kelkel. At this stage, he was the cook at Langy-Kelkel. He was, anyway. So on his days off, he would do a bit of plumbing work with Beaufort plumber Tosso Grant. And I heard a story that there was one morning Tosso called Dad and told him to come to work with his good clothes on underneath their plumber's overalls. And they headed off to the Ararat races. Told the man on the gate that they were there to fix the block toilet, and so they were given free entry. And once they got inside, they took off their overalls and had a day on the punt, and of course a few beers. When Barry wasn't working, he enjoyed going ferreting, mushrooming, spotlighting, yabbing, and often out to get a load of wood with his two mates from Langy-Kalkal, Donnie Templeton and Kelvin Underwood. And on many occasions they would get lost on their way home, finding themselves at Harney's pub in Beaufort or at the Lexton pub and coming home with only half a load. Dad often took us kids with him and we really loved it. Well, actually we all got to go with him, all of us young kids from Langy-Kalkal, and we just loved those days. They were awesome. So in his later years, he still liked to go ferreting. This was after he was out of the pub on a Tuesday. Or even actually when he was at the pub, he used to head off there with Sandy Hughes, and later on he used to go with Roscoe and Ronnie. And each of them all had their jobs. The others setting up the nets and catching the rabbits, and Dad had the most important job of them all, driving the car and listening to the races. He loved dogs, not just his greyhounds, but his hunting dogs as well. He loved them all, but he really loved his staghound Spot. This dog was special. He was one of a kind, the best rabbiting dog he'd ever seen, and he liked to boast about how he could go out and catch up to 70 or 80 pair of rabbits in just one night.
In 1976, Dad and Mum moved from Langy-Kalkal to the general store in Lexton. This was their first business venture, and they turned the shop around in just a few short months. Dad continued to work at Langy-Kalkal on his 4 days on, and Mum would manage the shop. They were a great team. 3 years later, they moved across the highway to the Lexton pub. This was their second success story. The pub became a very popular country hotel. People would come from surrounding towns for a great meal and hospitality. He supported all clubs in the town. However, as a sponsor, a player, an administrator, even an umpire. One day he was umpiring a cricket game that Lexton had to win to make the finals. The opposition needed 1 wicket and Lexton needed 1 run. Umpire's call was no ball. Lexton won the game. These times at the pub, the Lexton Footy Club and the Lexton community were some of the best years of Dad's life. He made many lifelong friends throughout these years. Back to you, Kes.
So their next business venture was the move to Ballarat to become owners and operators of the City Oval Hotel. Once again, they built this up to be a thriving business and arguably the most popular beer drinkers pub in Ballarat. Within a year, they went from doing 4 18-gallon barrels to 18 18-gallon barrels in a week during their busiest times. So Monday nights were sportsmen's nights. Many of the Ballarat Football League players from the local clubs would come to the pub and often leave in the wee hours of the morning. And Dad had a few old publican tricks up his sleeve. He would order in late night pizzas, then sprinkle a little bit of chilli on top, which obviously this would increase the thirst of the patrons, and of course they'd buy more beer. And then there was the Aquinas pub nights. They were huge. The place would be packed to the rafters. You seriously couldn't move those nights. And of course then there was a social club. I couldn't say for sure how many members there were, but at a guess it'd be a couple of hundred. The Christmas parties around the lake, the trips to the pokies, and I'm sure most of you who went would remember the trips to the MCG to watch the cricket. The first year there was a record crowd at the ground, and none of us that had gone down could get a seat anywhere in the ground. Then somehow Barry managed to get us all into square leg members section, where we sat in recliners and drank cold beers all afternoon. And this actually happened again the following year. Mum was the worker, the backbone of the business, and Dad was more the promotions, marketing and social manager. He did this very well. He had an ability to attract people to him, and this was why the pub was so popular and successful. He was often in more than one shout at a time. And quoted from one of his best barmen and good mates, Brett Milgate, Brett said, "Barry was without doubt the greatest drinker I have ever seen. His thirst was unquenchable. In those days, it was hard to get Barry to sit still. He was always on the phone talking to prospective recruits," that's for football, "and leaving us his drinking partners, not knowing where he was for long periods of time. One night, we thought we'd stitch him up. He was gone for some time, so we lined 6 pots up, and when he returned, we informed him he was 6 behind. Well, Barry didn't skip a beat. He proceeded to scull the 6 pots, then ordered 4 more pots, sculled his, then told me, Rodney and Smokey Dawson that we were 1 behind, and it completely destroyed us young smartasses."
As many of you would know, Dad and Mum were very generous. They helped anyone they could, sometimes providing a bed or a meal when needed. They also supported many clubs around the district, as Dad liked to support his patrons and give back to the community. The City Oval was a large part of their lives for 22 years. The friendships they formed with their employees and patrons will never be forgotten. There were many funny nights, especially once the curtains were drawn and the doors locked. Ready for a rest, they retired from the hotel game and built a beautiful house in Dyson Drive. Dad began breeding greyhounds again, and he and his mate Vic Gill delivered Meals on Wheels every Wednesday. He also found time to get down to St Leonard's to do more fishing. He just loved St Leonard's. It was his special place. Many family holidays have been spent at St Leonard's dating back for years, and many of Dad's friends have spent time there with him. I know you will all have fond memories. The grandchildren will have more to say about St Leonard's shortly. Not long in their retirement, Mum fell ill, and while she was in hospital, Dad would sit by her side every day. There was a time when she was in Melbourne for 4 months. Dad didn't want to leave her on her own, so he stayed in a hotel just down the road. He was never far away. They had some good years before Mum passed away in 2013, and Dad's heart was broken. He missed her awfully, and life was never the same. He would go to the cemetery every day, and sometimes twice a day. He would sit there and have his lunch, read the paper, and play music for Mum. Even on the days that he didn't have much time, he would still drive through the cemetery and blow her a kiss. Family meant everything to Dad. When his grandchildren were born, you could see the joy in his face. When they walked into his room, his eyes lit up. He was extremely proud of them all, and always said, "I'm the luckiest man in the world because I have the best family in the world." Carry again. You miss out, Rod.
I don't know what's happened here. Rod seemed to miss out here somewhere along the way, but anyway.
Bugger.
He'll get a go. So Dad was born during World War II. He didn't meet his father George, Augie, until he was 2 years old, and it did take him some time to accept George, and he was very protective of his mum Doris. In their early years, at points, they were all living together with his mum, his cousins, Donald and Ian, Jeanette, and his brother Neil, and his Nana and Pa, and Mabel and Charlie Cameron. So I think they were pretty tough times back then. And Nana Cameron, she was the matriarch of the family, and Dad inherited many of her traits. He took over her reign after she passed away in 1993 and has kept the Augustine, Cameron and Howden families together. The family Christmases have always been a highlight for Dad because he loved nothing more than having all his family together. He hated the idea of anyone spending Christmas on their own, so he would always make sure we had a few extra places at our table and a gift under the tree. And it will be now our job to keep this tradition going.
Outside of family, football was the greatest passion. He was a life member of the Lexington Football Club and the East Point Football Club. And the contributions? Hang on, spell it out. Sorry. The contributions he made to both will be his legacy. He was also a member of the Collingwood Football Club for 49 years. He loved the game and the friendships that come with it. He never missed a match, and he went to every VFL AFL Grand Final from 1966 to his last in 2018. This tradition began when him and Ray Fisher organised a few blokes from the Wexford Football Club to go to Melbourne for the weekend. A few turned to be 20 or so, and somehow they managed to get the tickets for them. Well, no one ever knows how they got them all, but they did. They instructed everyone to meet at the Corner Hotel, Richmond, at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, and we were all given a job, a shopping list divided between us to get beers, newspapers, cooked chooks, prawns, bread rolls and foam eskies. The beers went into the plastic bags wrapped in newspaper with the bread rolls on top. The chooks and prawns went into the eskies with the ice. When going through the turnstiles, the security used to always check the eskies but never ever the plastic bags. When we got to our seats, the food came out and the beers went in. The tradition went on for years with his mates from Lexington. They were huge weekends. Dad would leave on the Thursday, go to the Footscray luncheon on the Friday, to Percy's pub on the Friday night, and Saturday was game day. Sunday was off to the Moonee Valley races, and he'd get home on Monday. Being a Collingwood and AFL member, he was able to snag himself a ticket every year and somehow managed to get a few extras for anyone else who wanted to go.
Following a huge week of celebrations after the 2018 East Point Premiership win and another big weekend in Melbourne for the AFL Grand Final when Collingwood played West Coast, Dad became crook, which led him to be severely dehydrated. Dr Bongiorno stressed the importance of drinking more water. Dad always said he drank enough water because there wasn't water in beer. But on this occasion, and unlike Dad, to listen to instructions from a doctor, he drank more water. It seems, though, that his kidneys were not accustomed to this and he blew up with fluid and had to go to hospital. His diagnosis was wateritis. He said he'd never drink water again. It almost killed me once. When his sporting days were done and his knees were buggered, exercise was never a priority. When he moved to the house at Rod and Clare's, I remember saying to him that walking the 200 metres down the drive to the letterbox every day would be good for him. He agreed. A few days later, he bought himself a golf buggy to drive down. After 3 trips, this became Harry, Hannah's and Sarah's job.
Without Mummy to keep him in line, he often stayed out later than probably he should have. He probably wasn't doing his health any favours. In November 2018, he suffered a stroke. Sadly, this was the last day he lived at home. When he was in rehab at the QE, he was scared of falling over, so the physios put him in harnesses to do some walking. They said he had to do 10 steps, so in true Barry form, he was quick to start counting. He'd take 1 step and count 2. They eventually got him to the pool. Jack came along one day to support and cheer him on, and a little way into the first session, he called Jack over and said, "Jack, can you hang on to these for me? I don't want to lose them." And then he proceeded to hand Jack his false tooth. Just one of his favourite old jokes, you know. Even when he wasn't feeling the best, he was still making a joke out of things. Along with being a joker, Dad always had a few favourite quotes and sayings that are true testaments of his character. He always said, "All the best as opposed to good luck." Dad believed you made your own luck. Just one for the road, sometimes several times. His mate Roscoe recalls down at St Leonard's, he said 9 times. We'll have one more, you know. Your health's your wealth. This couldn't be truer. Here's to good health. And the most meaning one of all, there's big ships and there's small ships, but there's nothing like friendships.
For the past 2 years, Dad wasn't able to live the full life that he was accustomed to. And this broke our hearts. Anyway, we had a few good times. We used to get him down to the footy as much as possible because he just loved those days. And he was able to celebrate Jake and Jane's wedding, which he attended. And he had been really quite unwell at that time, but he stressed the importance that he was going to get there. It didn't matter how hard it was going to be. Anyway, he made himself well enough to get there. And then, of course, the birth of his first great-grandson, George. And I'm just going to ad-lib a bit here. Every time, you'd go in to visit him, how's Georgie? If Debbie had sent him a photo, it was just awesome. So just 4 weeks ago, getting back to these few good times we had, we were able to celebrate Dad's 80th birthday, and it was really something special. He was really quite proud of himself for reaching this milestone. And it was a wonderful celebration with some of his dearest friends and family, and we are blessed that we had the opportunity to share this day with him, and having no idea it would be the last time that we would all be together. We know your story will never end, Dad. Your memories will remain for us forever. It broke our hearts the day you left us, but you never went alone. And we know that you are now back with your beautiful Amy and our beautiful mum. And you're our hero, Dad. We love you with all our hearts.
Now, if I can invite Barry's brother Neil to come forward, please.
Boy, that's going to be a hard act to follow, isn't it, really? Just fantastic. And it's a privilege for me to speak on behalf of my brother, because I feel like I'm not Barry's only brother. There's so many brothers here tonight, or this afternoon, and sisters. Nikki, who come in to see him every day, Brett Milgate, Bigsy, and so many other. You know who you are, and you all become his brother as well, I'm sure, and he knows that. But firstly, can I just say that if I had to choose a brother, I couldn't have found a more generous, kind, supportive, strong and caring brother than Barry. Our parents loved the both of us, George and Dorothy. They loved Barry and myself, although Barry and George at times had a few little difficulties, but never mind. They loved us both, and they instilled in us a bond which we both have had forever. And never once have we had a dispute. Maybe once, and he won. As a kid, I had surgery on both legs when I was a young kid, and had to have them broken, reset, and I couldn't walk all that well, so I couldn't get around and I couldn't be involved with other people, but it was Barry who would carry me on his back or dink me on his bike. And he'd look after me, and that's why we become more than special, the two of us. Barry loved his family, and he also loved his cousins Ian, Donald and Jeanette. I make special mention of that because they were very, very close, and that's something that I don't want to leave out. Brett and his mates at high school, I think Barry led the whole lot of them astray. Seriously, he did enjoy their company. Barry loved life, as we've just heard Kerry and Debbie say, and Rodney. He loved his fishing, he loved his beers, and each time after his fishing he'd attend the St Leonard's Hotel and he'd come back to the beach house with not one or two pizzas, but 3 big belly buster pizzas loaded with anchovies. He'd have a dozen dim sims and a jar of pickled onions for us all to eat, and we all be included in it. I don't know whether the next day that became the burley out on the boat, but he enjoyed our company and we loved him. Over the years, regularly I would get to pick up Barry on a Friday night and take him to the East Sports Club, or the bowling club I should say, and then I'd take him down here. Actually tonight I'd be bringing him down here for the greyhounds. He loved his greyhounds. Slip Away Lass and Mahogany. Sure knows. I think he ended up giving one of his best greyhounds. So I'll keep it short because there's so many stories and you know so many more than I do probably. When Barry was in he'd become unwell, and he phoned me up one day and he said, I want you to pick me up and take me to the doctors. And I said, right. So I get out to Rodney's property, and Barry's got a box. And I said, what's this for? And he said, it's all my medication. I don't want it. He said, I can't taste me beer. I said, but it's been prescribed for you, Barry. It's some of that may be important. He said, I don't care. Take me to the doctors, they can have it back. I only want the tablets that I can taste my beer with. And I'm sure some of those tablets might have kept him going a bit longer, but I couldn't dispute Barry. Barry was very, what would you say, Kerry? Very persuasive, Rodney. But anyway, as time went by and Barry was in Calliston, and I'd go in there every night time, as Kerry said, and Debbie, and take him his sweet and sour or his flake or whatever he wanted and have a chat with him. And I went in one night and he seemed rather forlorn and a little down. And I said to him, what's the matter? And he said, I might have to have my toe off. And I thought, oh, what could I say to console him? There must be something I could say. I know what I'll say. Mountain climbers that climb Mount Everest, they have to have their toes off too because they get frostbite. He called me over. He said, well, I'm going to tell you something, Neil. I've never climbed a fucking mountain in my life. True story. Sorry for the language for young George over there. But he's going to hear plenty if he's around Rodney. Thank you all for being here and for being my brother's best friend and being the friend of a legend. Because for me, Barry is a true legend and he ain't heavy. He's my brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. And now if I can have the grandchildren come forward, please.
Pa. Well, that's how we knew him. We were younger, but as we grew up, we got to know him as Aug. The 8 of us, Jake and myself, Jack, Sam and Matt, and Harry, Hannah and Sarah, have been the luckiest grandkids. The love Pa had for us, felt by all, and will never be forgotten. The memories we have with him is something we will cherish forever. At the City Oval, down in the corner at Alfredton, out at Creswick, at Rodney's place at Mount Rowan, or at the beach at St Leonard's. The life experiences, the gambling, the drinking, the nights out, the football, the phone calls, his greyhounds, the back scratching, his cheeky witty comments, his huge nights of cooking, or the funny stories he would tell will always be cherished. We've had some good times, Aug, but one place I will never forget is our time at St Leonard's. If we're out in the boat, in at the pub, or going for a drive along the coast, there was never a dull moment. As a young fella back then, I was a pretty keen fisherman and I was always dying to get out of the boat. I'd get up in the morning earlier than Pa. I'd sneak into their room. I'd look out the window and see the trees aren't blowing and, oh, I'm excited, I'm ready to go. I'd walk over and sneak over to Aug and, rub him on the back and say, Aug, ready to go. It's time to go fishing. Aug would look at me and goes, make sure the boat's ready. I'll be up soon. Looking back now, I know he probably was never feeling too flash from the night before because he probably had a fair few beers but yeah, he made sure that when he got out there, he was if we weren't ready or the boat wasn't organised, we sure knew about it. Pa, as a fisherman, he had his patience, he had the touch, and he had the knowledge. But one thing he was never good at was watching other people around him catch fish when he wasn't. It wouldn't take him long to say, "Hey Jake," who was sitting in the driver's seat, "can you pull the steering wheel down to the right? We need to get the boat up with the wind and the tide." But we all knew it was really so we could chuck his rod out into that sandy little hole where we were catching all the whiting. Some other memories on the boat were him eating the mussels that he peeled, one for the fish and one for Pa. Another when he had to relieve himself on the makeshift toilet and he washed a bucket in the water. I don't think the fish found it very good burleys. The day he dropped Jake off at Swan Bay, one of the rare days we weren't catching many fish, and Jake wasn't feeling too well. He got a bit seasick. The depth reader told us he was in 3 foot of water, and Jake jumped out, and the water went straight over his head. We were a bit deeper than that. I all of a sudden started to feel a bit better and said, "I think I'll hang in there and get through the rest of the day." I can still remember him telling the story back at the pub that night and laughing to all the locals there. After a day fishing, we'd go back and we'd clean up. The other thing he was very good at was filleting his whiting. Generally, a lot of the times we'd bag out. But after that, it didn't take him long to get dressed and have a shower and get dressed and ask Nan to take him down to the pub. His day's work was done. It was now time for him to relax and put his feet up. Sitting at the pub talking to a few fellow fishermen, Pa never gave up our spots where we were catching them. I can remember sitting around and then one fella asked how he went, and I jumped up quickly as a young fella and said, "Yeah, we bagged out." Pa gave me this funny look, shook his head and said, "Oh, no, we did okay." He played it down a fair bit. He didn't want others knowing just how well we went or where we were fishing, but he always had his ear to the ground trying to find out where everyone else was catching them. It wouldn't matter what time he got home, Nan would always still be waiting for him to cook his piece of fresh whiting and make sure he was going to bed on a full stomach. Wasn't that long ago that I was down with Aug, Rodney, and the memory of us, me and Pa, came flooding back. Things I'd do to have those days back with you all. Sorry. You'll be now with our lovely Nan, Heaney. Give her a big cuddle for us. We'll miss her heap too. I love you all. Unfortunately, mate, no more bets. Thank you.
Thanks, Blair. You started me already. Pa was a storyteller. The things he has seen, the stories he told, is something we all love to listen to, especially me. Sometimes I couldn't tell if Pa was telling a joke or a story until the punchline. Some of his stories, he might have had a little pepper on to make it sound a bit better, but one thing is for sure, when he was talking or telling a joke, everyone would sit and listen. My 2 favourite jokes he told were the ones about Rodney and the jam sandwiches and his champion staghound Spotty out duck shooting. I'm sure many of you would have heard those jokes as he told them regularly, but they got it better every time he told them. Pa also loved a practical joke, and that leads me to a story I wanted to share. Pa and I both love rabbiting and shooting, and we'd be always competing and comparing stories to prove who was the best shot. One visit to Nan and Pa's place in Alfreton, Pa was in his normal spot out in the shed, which was set up with enough TVs for the footy, both Sky channels, and the odds of the next race. However, on this occasion, he had the slug gun sitting next to him shooting the starlings when they were wrecking his lawn. When the starlings landed on the lawn, Pa slowly moved to the side door of the shed, poked the gun around the corner, and pop, he shot one of the starlings. He was quick to tell me that was 3 out of 3 for the day. The next time the starlings landed on the lawn, Pa said, "Jake, you're always telling me how good a shot you are. You have a shot. Here, the gun's loaded and ready to go." So I snuck around the corner, took my aim, and bang, nothing. All the starlings flew away. Pa never stopped reminding me about that day. Whenever we were having a few beers with some of Pa's mates, he was always happy to tell the story of how I couldn't shoot the starlings. It wasn't until a few years later Pa's mate Roscoe filled me in on a little detail of the story that Pa would tell his mates when I wasn't there. Before Pa handed me the gun, he only pretended to load it, and he never put a slug in it. He thought it was hilarious and continued to tell the story for many years after. Pa and I also shared a love of having a bet. He would always be ringing through the tips that we'd got from Robert and Donga for the horses and Digger and Gary for the greyhounds. In Pa's final 12 months, he lost a little bit of ability to use his betting app on his phone, so instead he would ring me every day with his daily bets. Those phone calls would always start, "You got a pen?" Those phone calls are going to be one of the things I miss the most. Recently, Pa had just become a great-grandfather to my son, George Donald, named after Barry Donald. The amount of love Pa showed towards George is something I'll cherish forever. During those daily phone calls, he would always ask, "How's me mate George?" and then proceed to tell me he reckons George looked just like him and was cheeky just like him as well. Pa signed George up as a Collingwood member. Sorry, all. I'm not sure I can encourage George to barrack for the Pies, but I'm sure Auntie Kerry will do her best. To finish, I'd just like to say Pa was the greatest Pa anyone could have. But he wasn't just a Pa, he was one of my best mates, and you couldn't get a better mate. There's big ships, there's small ships, but there's nothing like friendships. Love you all.
Following on from what Jake just said, Pa being a long-life Collingwood man, just shy of 50 years as a member, and with Mum also being a Collingwood fan, it didn't leave Jack, myself and Matt much of a choice of who to barrack for. Unfortunately, I don't think Pa and Mum will have much of a say when it comes to George, but I'm very happy we stuck with the Pies as they're some of the fondest memories with all. We'd speak often about whether we'd win that week and which players needed to be dropped. I was lucky enough to attend the 2011 and 2018 AFL Grand Final and spend those weekends in Melbourne with all. Unfortunately, both times we didn't come away with the cup, but that's not important. Getting to spend the weekend with Org was always something I'll never forget. He went to plenty of grand finals over his time, in fact 50 years in a row, 52 grand finals including the draws. Though I know it was when he got to take his grandkids, it was extra special for him. We spent the weekend at the pub, the G, or at the Westlakes Chinese restaurant. I have a quick story about how Westlakes came to be his regular grand final dinner spot. And now I'm not sure how accurate this is, and as Jake mentioned, Org's stories always seem to get better and better each time he told them. And feel free to correct me if not, this isn't 100% true, but this is how he told it. He and a group of mates went out after the grand final, and I'd assume that they'd had put back a few pots over the day. They then come across this Chinese restaurant in Chinatown. Being Org, they ordered enough food to feed a small army, and when it came around to pay, he and his mates realised they didn't have any cash. With that, they quickly got up and left without paying. The next year, though, they went back for another feed, paid for the year before, and the tradition began. This continued for many years, and we will continue the tradition in memory of Org. Pa would always invite anyone that he knew was in town to come and feast on a crayfish that was freshly pulled out of the tank and crawled around on the floor. He loved to see which one was the most lively, as he believed it would taste the best. The feast was made up of cray, the spicy Chinese soup that you sure knew about the next day, enough spring rolls and dim sims to make anyone full, and to top it all off, some half-warm Carlton draft stubbies. Not that we'd need any more beers anyway. For me, the most special night was the Friday night before the 2018 Grand Final. Just Org and I were together, having a few beers at the Rising Sun Hotel before he headed over to Westlake for a late night Friday night feed. It was the same situation as I described before, however he saved the cray for the Saturday night. At the pub we got speaking to some people and they couldn't believe the relationship myself and Pa had. We were both so proud that night of how close our family is. Love you, mate. Rest in peace.
There are so many funny times and special memories that we had with Pa, but some that we will never forget come from when he lived in the little house next door to us. One of the most prominent memories is the Thursday night dinners and all that would come with them.
Firstly, each week began with Pa picking me up from school. crossing and taking me straight to the Miners' Rest RGA, where he handed me his shopping list, which was written in all capital letters, cash, and don't forget the Richie's card. I became great friends with the RGA staff as we were always trying to decipher what was actually written on the list. With Pa a big fan of bulk buying, always trying to find a bargain, the list often featured 15 big red spuds, 2 20 packs of toilet paper, 8 cans of diced tomatoes, not crushed, I learnt that the hard way, and 10 tins of curry powder, which seem to have always been used.
And then it came to Thursday nights, which was Pa's night to cook. And as we all knew what was in store for us, we had learnt to start fasting on Tuesday night in preparation for the size of the meal. To put this into perspective, an example of one of our meals is lamb shanks. My plate consisting of about 4 shanks, 10 spuds, and whatever else you could fit on there. And if you had let slip that you were even remotely hungry, the meal size doubled. Another classic dish Pa would often cook up was curried snags. And if you walked into the kitchen on Thursday, you could tell he used to be chef at the Langikalkal prison, as he would make 2 large stock pots full of curried snags, plus another of mashed spuds. Keep in mind, there was only 6 of us. And if you dared to leave a drop on your plate, he would be severely disappointed. Therefore, we would all leave there as full as a doctor's wallet.
At these dinners, as we continually struggled to keep putting food on the fork and into our mouths, there were always many funny and interesting conversations being had, as I'm sure you can all imagine. For me, these interesting conversations sometimes resulted in a heated debate with Pa when discussing topics such as the women's AFL, for example. Although our opinions sometimes differed, I would constantly remind myself that if I were to play in the women's AFL myself, there is no way he would ever miss a game. And my goodness, by the end of these conversations, Pa would somehow have us all in tears of laughter.
We love you, Pa, and we'll miss you.
Love you, Pa.
It's hard to find the words, but I just want you to know that I'll miss you, Pa. I'll miss that wink you always gave me. I'll miss you hear you calling me your Maddie, and I'll miss that firm handshake with every hello and goodbye. But I'll feel you in my heart forever. I love you, Pa.
Pa, I thought long and hard about trying to sum up what you mean to me in words, and let me tell you it was difficult. Words just can't do it justice. You were loving, caring, supportive, but most of all, you were proud. Not just of me, but of all your grandchildren. There was nothing in the world that put a bigger smile on your face than spending time with all of us together at once. When writing this speech, I've come to realise why you enjoyed this so much. We always had fun, with plenty of laughter. Plus, it also saved you from having to get up off your chair to get a beer. You had 8 of us on hand to always get you a fresh stubby, which from memory was bloody often. I have many great memories of my childhood of you, Pa, which will stay with me forever. As I got older and my time at the East Point Footy Club began, I got to know Pa even more. Each Saturday, I'd arrive at the Eastern Oval just before midday. If I ever wanted to say good day to Pa, it was pretty easy to find him. There he was, sitting on his stool on the corner of the canteen balcony. By this time of the day, he was normally on to his 2nd or 3rd meat pie. Then after the game, I didn't need to look. I just knew where I'd find him. All of 20 metres he'd travelled to his favourite seat in the club rooms, not far from the bar, and where he could keep an eye on everything. I'd walk up and say g'day, he'd shake my hand, and he'd tell me how he thought I played. He didn't sugarcoat it much, he just told it how it was. After this, he'd hand me a 20 and say, get yourself a beer and another one for Pa while you're up there. Pa loved spending time at the footy club, and even more so loved having his grandkids playing the red, white and blue. However, Pa, the time we've spent together in recent years, as your health declined, I hold just as dearly. I visited Pa quite a lot over my longer lunch breaks in the last 2 years, and we both enjoyed each other's company equally. We often walked the streets of Ballarat on a lovely sunny day, enjoying an iced coffee and talking about whatever or whoever we wanted. He always talked me into walking an extra block. We just walked and talked without a care in the world. It was in these special moments I really got to know another side of my pa. Pa, thank you for everything you've done for me and this family. I spoke earlier about how proud you were of us grandkids, but let me tell you, we were just as proud to call you our pa. Rest in peace, mate.
I'd like to thank the family for sharing those wonderful memories of Barry with us today. It's a very hard thing to do when you're grieving for someone you love so much, so thank you for finding the strength today. It's really fabulous stories. We are going to take a walk down memory lane now and enjoy a slideshow of Barry's life. There's no doubt that Barry's had a wonderful full life and the wonderful loving family that have shared it with him. For those he leaves behind, it is his memories that will give you all comfort. Memories come in many different forms, beautiful, amazing photos that we've just seen, or a word someone may say that will suddenly recapture a time or an hour or a day that will bring him back as clearly as though he was still here. Even though Barry has taken his last steps on this earth, you will no longer hear the sound of his voice or feel the touch of his hand. It is his precious memory that will live on. And so I encourage you all to continue to tell his story, speak his name often. Each story will be different, as he has been different to each one of you. But as long as his stories are told and his memories are remembered, he will continue to live on in everyone's hearts for many, many years to come. So family and friends, we are coming to the conclusion of this part of the service today. Shortly the cortege will take Barry on his last journey to his final resting place. I have been asked to ensure that everyone can leave this building as quickly as we can due to, I'm not sure what's happening now, we've sort of gone a bit longer, but with buses and things, if we can get out and get up to the cemetery as quickly as we can, that would be wonderful. As a final dedication, I'm going to read a poem that has been given to me today from Debbie and Murray. So, ready or not, someday it will all come to an end. There will be no more sunrises, no minutes, hours or days. All things you collected, whether treasured or forgotten, will pass to someone else. It will not matter what you owned or what you owed. The wins and losses that once seemed so important will fade away. It doesn't matter where you come from or what side of the tracks you lived on in the end. It doesn't matter if you were beautiful or if you were brilliant. So what will matter? How will the value of your days be measured? What will matter is not what you bought, but what you built. Not what you got, but what you gave. What will matter is not your successes, but your significance. Not what you learned, but what you taught. What will matter is not your competence, but your character. Not how many people you knew, but how many will feel a lasting effect that you have gone. What will matter is not your memories, but the memories of those who loved you. What will matter is how long you will be remembered, by whom and for what. Living a life that matters doesn't happen by accident. It's not a matter of circumstance, but of choice. Choose to live a life that matters. And that's what Barry Augustine did. Please be upstanding, everyone.